You're listening to the Polymer podcast. My name is Lucy, and I'm happy to introduce you to Yoya and her artwork in this brand new episode. In Yoya, Agnes explores gesture, selfhood, and body language through sculpture in polymer clay. She is one of a few people who devote their art to the realistic interpretation of women's bodies. And that is, in today's world where media present one idealized standard we all should reach, very important. Hello, Yulia. I'm so happy to see you and to meet you in this way.
I'm so happy to be here.
Hello. We were in touch a few times because of the collaboration with the Polymer Week magazine and the Society. But today I'm super happy to have you in our Polymer Week podcast. I prepared a few tricky questions for you, so...
Oh, God. Okay.
No, but I'm just looking forward to hearing more in person and more details about your art. Do you like listening to podcasts? Do you have some favorites?
I do. I have about I want to say about 40 on this phone right now. I listen to everything from politics to art to science. There's a lot kind of going on, and I'll listen throughout the day. And so, at the moment, it's a lot more science-based than anything else, just to kind of change my mindset and get into other things. So there's a lot of NPR, there's a lot of nature, there's a lot of big biology, that kind of stuff.
Wow. In your artwork, you explore the profusion of beauty within mood, emotion, and character. And I'm curious, when did you first get the idea to start sculpting women characters from polymer clay?
Oh, man. So I started Polymer probably a year and a half ago. It's actually quite recent. I'd sculpted before, but this particular kind of thing I'm pretty new to, and so it's been a big learning curve. But it came probably at the end of the year, right before the pandemic hit. That was kind of when it started. So January 2020 is when the first granny appeared. Literally on New Year's Day, I got up at like 4 a.m. and I was like, this needs to come out because it's been kind of in the back of my head for so long. And I just sat there before sunrise and I started working, and things started coming out really quickly. And I think a lot of it had to do with kind of processing my own feelings and processing my own grief and my own ideas around femininity and body and self-perception and everything that goes into that. Frankly, a lot of frustration and anger at like the way that women are portrayed right now. And that's changing. It's changing very quickly, but it's still frustrating to see that happening.
To be honest, I have that kind of feeling that this session with you is going to be a therapy for me as well. Because, I was talking about your artwork with someone today, with our graphic designer of the magazine, and we were like, this is like an issue that we are going through as well. And we are like, I would say that we are young, like 20, 25 years. And the body shaming and everything that is happening in the world and also in our minds. I'm just like very happy that this is the topic you chose to create and also to share with your audience.
Thank you. I'm glad I can help. Yeah, it's definitely something that's prevalent, and it's something that as well for me has been a bit of a learning experience. I come from a family of women. Like it's been 3 generations of single mothers essentially, and so it's the matriarch is always something that's been present. And I had a really interesting upbringing in that way, where like I wasn't aware so much of how I was coming out into the world. For a very long time I was very sheltered and very kind of in my own bubble. And probably very naive in a lot of ways as well. And so when it did kind of hit, and I'm in my 30s, I'm starting to have wrinkles. There's there's tiredness that just doesn't go away anymore. Like the bags are there. and kind of perceiving, suddenly feeling like I'm being less seen, like less noticed. And what I'm noticing is not kind of so much the attention as the absence of it. That kind of awareness that like suddenly I'm not necessarily comfortable being in front of the camera. I'm not, and the way that like my body's changing, and the way that the women around me, especially the older women, see themselves. And it's been a really interesting thing to see that happen, because a lot of the time what I've seen is the people that have asked me why, you make, your work is so realistic. It's so close to, they look like they could open their eyes. Why don't you make beautiful people? And it's like, and I asked them with the men, and it was just like, well, why don't you make, young? And the women that it was coming from were older women. And this is how they saw themselves, as like not, not being beautiful, not being existent, not being present. There's this, everything has to be younger. You don't want to age. You don't want to have wrinkles. You don't want to have, but the thing is that with age comes experience. And one of the things that I'm finding now is that I'm more comfortable in myself than I have ever been. And when I look at the women that have been really important in my life, they grow into themselves. They become more of the core person that they are. There's less apologism, I guess is the word, right? There's less kind of trying to present a face externally, and more of just self-acceptance and being able to live off their experience, which is something that, men have always had. But it's a process.
You said, or you mentioned in the beginning, that the topic of the elderly women creating from polymer clay, you got that idea a few, like how many days, months ago, before you actually started to sculpt?
Years.
Years.
Years. So I'd been sculpting clay for a long time, and it's something that I did on and off. I always had it on the side. And I lived in the UK, and I'd found my first brick of polymer clay. It was the only one I'd found. Like, it was just, I couldn't find it again. And I made this old man kind of just like coming out of the stone. And there was something about the texture and, the ease of being able to create it. And again, like, it just came out. And then I couldn't find anymore. And it just didn't seem to exist. And it was really difficult to get it shipped in. And so I kind of kept to clay, and, life kind of kept going. And then I got here, and we have the, fantastic art resources available. And all of a sudden I was just kind of buying it in bulk whenever it was in, and like just stocking up, because it would run out every once in a while. And I'd just be like, it's because it's all in my house now. And so, yeah, I've been able to stay with it a little bit more and do a little bit more exploring in that sense.
Which brand of clay do you work with?
So I use Super Sculpey.
Super Sculpey. That's interesting.
Yeah, it's got a really good texture. It's a little bit harder to work with, so it's got a little bit more give, unless it's really hot and humid, which it's going to be very soon, and so then it softens up. But it keeps the detail in a really good way, and the tones work well, especially when I'm painting. It's easy to bring something in or out of it.
What is fascinating to me, you said that you work with the clay for a year and a half. And I just can't believe that you are already creating such art pieces as you do. I believe, and I get the fact that you must have some art degree or something, some experience in this industry. But like the results is incredible.
So I did study fine art, yeah. I did painting and photography, and so I still do photography. Less so the painting these days. But again, the sculpture was something that just kept going. On the side, I was doing art fairs and things like that while I was kind of working full time elsewhere. And so that, the practice was there, the work was there, the learning was there. And that's something that just never stopped, and something I've been doing since I was little. I actually didn't do very much of it in school at all. I didn't feel comfortable presenting that side of
Uh-huh.
myself when I was, I was doing like abstract works, like I remember I did a sculpture of wire or something and presented that instead. It was immobile and nothing to do with this, just because I didn't feel comfortable showing kind
Uh-huh.
of the more realistic things. Yeah.
What's the feedback of your audience and the people around, and maybe your family, that you became a sculptor, sculpting women like that?
I was allowed to do my own thing, and I think I come from a very eclectic family. So like my grandfather was a playwright, my grandmother was a television producer back in Poland, and my mom, was writer creative, and it's just kind of been accepted that we do strange things. Like, and when I say strange, it's just like, you're 20, you finish university, you get on a sailboat and you just go on like 24 hours notice, because that's, what are you going to do after school? And like, you go traveling. When I moved to the UK, I went with just a backpack, and like there was just no kind of no surprise about it. It was just kind of living outside the frame of things, and it's not to say that it's been easy. There's very long stretches of time where it's hand to mouth. Like you work just to kind of try and figure out where the bills are going to come from, where stuff's going to come from. Um, but with the art, it's never really been a choice. It's just been something that's been part of the fabric of
Uh-huh.
growing up and of living. And I don't know that these would have been the favorites in my family. I don't think they would have liked them that much. But I think they appreciated slightly more classical works. Like I went through a very skeletal Lechewski phase, and that was very much liked. But I think these ones wouldn't pass muster.
Hmm. Well, I'm curious that after you finished the college and the university, what was it like for you to be free, but also with that comes the responsibility, or just like, you suddenly need to take care of yourself as an artist?
I don't think I ever had that until very recently. So I started working when I was very young. I started working when I was
Uh-huh.
16, and that contributed to my studies. And then I moved out when I was 18 and was pretty much self-sufficient after that. Parents would help here and there, but it was kind of few and far in between. I think I was a grown up very early in that sense.
Uh-huh.
And it was very much about doing what was available. So I've done a little bit of everything. Getting into the art world was particularly hard, especially with ceramic, and I think I hadn't quite found my voice yet, and I think that showed in my work. Um, and so I worked in television production, and I worked on boats, and I worked in bars, and as a waitress, and everything in between, as a rock climbing instructor for a while. And so it's
Uh-huh.
it's been a roller coaster, but the art was just, again, like it was just always something that was on the side and that I was always doing. Like I always had a setup. I always had, a space, regardless of where I was, where I could create, where I could make something, because if I didn't feel like me. I didn't feel like myself. So it's
Uh-huh.
always been there.
And do you feel that all those different kinds of the jobs you did kind of, influence the way of your art?
I think probably. I think it gives you different perspectives. You meet different kinds
Uh-huh.
of people, different ages, different socioeconomic groups. If you're in a place like Europe, different social status, which is less prevalent here. It's still around, but there's not quite the distinction. So like if you go to a bar here, like the thing that I would notice is that you go out with all of your workmates and everybody's kind of in the same field, and here it doesn't matter. We don't seem to have that same kind of division um of work and space. And so you'll go, and like one person will work in a restaurant and the other will work in something else, and the other person will work in something else, or like be a doctor or whatever. And like you get along because you have common interests and common things going on. It's less
Uh-huh.
kind of subdivided than what I saw elsewhere. um and so I think it leaves you space to take in a lot of the experiences of other people.
You observe people a lot, right?
I do. I could do observe people a lot. Not in a creepy way, I promise.
Yeah. So after the podcast will end, you will be like, "Oh, Lucy Wilson," like.
No, it's one of these things that's just, I find that people always ask about beauty with these, like the physical beauty of these. And one of the things that I've found is that people get more or less attractive depending on who they are. And, you can have someone who physically will look less, Adonis, and then doesn't have much going on. And so they become less attractive. And so there's a whole other, world of spectrum of beauty and attractiveness. And, I look for that a lot in both in these, but also like in my photography work, because there's so much more than just that kind of like very narrow idea of like, white, tall, skinny. And I really try and bring that out in the person that I'm working with, that I'm photographing in these pieces. And because that's what I find beautiful.
You must be like a very sensible person, because as you are talking about characters and people and what they look like and what they are like within a person, like inside, do you feel like you are sensible to things going around you?
I think I always was. I grew up in a very strained and particular set of circumstances, and I think one of the things that taught me was, you look for mood, you look for switches in mood, you look for how people react to things, and you become very adept at being able to read other people under those circumstances. And especially if you leave the house early, you have to learn to judge people very quickly. And I've been incredibly lucky to be surrounded and kind of find a really good community and find good people. And it's definitely something that I'm aware of, and I find that I will also mirror the energy around me in that sense as well. And so, if there's tension, I'll feel it. If there's, and whatever people bring to the table, I'll tend to mirror. And so I think because of that, I've become a lot more selective in kind of who I bring closely into my life as well.
You are saying things, and I'm immediately thinking about that in my own life. So the therapy just started. But it's just like kind of truth that, I gotta compare myself to you, but I feel things that others or people around kind of don't care about that much. And sometimes it feels strange because you feel like that you are not like judging people, but that you sense more that maybe even was not there. Like you are getting some kind of feelings and image of that person, and you are just like asking yourself, like, was it real or was it just like my feelings? And just trying it all put together.
That makes a lot of sense. There's this idea that there's three experiences in the room, right? There's what you bring to it because you have all of this history and all of this baggage that's entirely your own, and so you live within that spectrum. There's the other person that's also bringing that, and then there's what's actually happening. And so, the events are threefold. There's you, me, and then the reality of what's happening. And so, what I'm putting down is not necessarily what you're picking up. And so I think that's the most natural thing of the world. And I think the only thing you can do in that sense is try and figure out how it serves you and, what you're learning from it and what feels healthy in those moments, what feels like it's lifting you up, like it's lifting the other person up, and, what's caring and loving and important out of that.
Now you will be maybe surprised, but are you a fan of Marvel movies?
I'm a huge fan.
Oh my god. Because you are like talking about concepts and things that are like happening there at some fantasy way. And I always found it so fascinating that these things are actually happening somewhere in those
like the
movies.
Multiverse?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a good way of looking at it. Now, that's something that I wonder about for sure. When I was little, one of the things I actually used to do is whenever there was like a reflection or something, I would always check whether I would tap on a glass and see whether there was maybe the possibility of going through, because there was another universe on the other side, and it was like maybe a crossover.
Yeah.
Gives you a little bit of insight into what's going on in here. But yeah, no.
Yeah,
Marvel,
like why not?
amazing.
Yeah. It's so cool.
Yeah, no, I grew up on comic books and just books and a lot of reading. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it definitely like influenced the way, I don't know, we are like living in the world, because I don't know what is your experience when you are leaving the cinema or when you finish the movie. But I'm just like always, I'm with my sister there and we are like, wow, this is just happening around us for sure. Or something like you see the concept getting kind of real.
Yeah.
And it's like so cool to, like just like wonder what is the fantasy and what is not. And
I mean, what isn't?
Yeah.
Wait, so okay, have you, we can't give bloopers away. Like we can't, not bloopers, we can't give away stuff. But like, have you watched Loki and Doctor Strange as well?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like
Okay.
the time and everything.
Yeah. Yeah.
This is definitely not going to be a podcast about Polymer, I guess.
I mean, there's so much more to it, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, no, like diverging timelines is so interesting. Like every choice that you make, right? Like every decision that you make, the person that you choose to become. And that's the thing that I've kind of been thinking about the most recently. It's like, especially when you think about these different timelines, is like consciously making a choice for what kind of person you're going to become. And like, it's not always possible in the moment, but like when you're living something, you have that realization of like, okay, what kind of person do I want to be? How do I want to address this? And like sometimes, unfortunately, it comes after the fact, and like, shit has hit the fan, so to speak. But like, when you have those moments of like, okay, I have a choice to pick a direction, that's such a beautiful concept, and like a beautiful life experience, that like you're able to decide to take a road, to take a purpose. My words are failing me.
Yeah, like every single of their movie, there is like something that just makes you think differently in the moment. And even though it's just like a comic based stuff, it's just like so cool that the concept is there. Yeah, it's like I'm just amazed. I know I'm always wondering if like Stanley was some sort of like, I don't know, like the way that he was thinking and creating these things in the world, that must be like incredible. And his mind and the people, and like even the Kevin Feige and everyone around who is like involved in that's like,
yeah,
wow, must be a lot.
I mean, I would give everything to spend a day in the mind of Stanley and kind of live in those universes proper, like just to be able to live that and create it must be next level. I mean, the thing that I wonder is like, there are things that become normal to you, and like whether when he was seeing it come out, in these movies, when he was seeing all of this kind of take place, how much, like how his world, how his vision was affected by that, and how it changed. And I mean, you look at the experience of the people that have worked on those movies, and everybody's saying that it was incredible, and I think it's just because of that one mind, that like that one creativeness. So whatever magic he had in that brain of his was
yeah. And even the way that they are doing the marketing and everything around, it's so inspiring to me, because like just those posters for the movies and everything, I'm just like fascinated by the graphic design and the way that they promote each movie and each thing in advance. It's just like very inspiring, and something where I learn a lot, like with every new project that's coming out. So there is a lot of things, and I think we can agree that we can definitely recommend to everyone from the Polymer Clay Wars to become a Marvel addict.
Oh, for sure. For sure. Yeah. Like a secret dream of mine is to one day be a Marvel villain. Like that is my pipe dream. If I can ever, like, I don't care who, like I'll just take whatever. But like, yeah, it since I was little, that was something that like has definitely been like a little voice in my head, like maybe one day. So we'll see. Maybe when I'm, an old lady, I'll have my my turn.
Yeah, but you know what is also fascinating about that? One last thing, that with every single new movie or series or anything, they are like exploring a different culture. So right now with Miss Marvel, you get like Pakistani, and with others you had like Indian, Eternals, and so on. So that's something that you do as well, because you are like showing something that people like don't talk much about. There is some kind of like similarity, at least I see it that way.
So I can't say in good faith that my pieces are multicultural. I mean they are white. There is a question that's been raised a couple of times. I answered this on the Famous When I'm Dead podcast, and also it is a question that people message me, and it's why, you know, why haven't I sculpted um black or indigenous or women of color? And the truth of it is that I can't speak to that experience. I can't speak to what it is like to live in a black body in America. To feel unsafe, to have so much, um, history and stigma attached to just the very image of, of a body, right? Like, so we have a history in art of exoticizing and commodifying and appropriating the bodies of women of color. And we live in a society where that is still a struggle daily. And so, I'm from Canada. I'm first generation here, and I can't speak to the experience of a woman who has gone to, let's say, residential school and has had the experience of eugenics, has had the experience of forced sterilization, and everything that is attached to that. That is not a right that I have to represent that in a body. And I'm looking at these pieces that are exposed, they're raw, they're naked, they're vulnerable, and I don't feel that I have the right to embody a woman of color. I don't feel that I have the right to portray that in a way that these pieces are, because there's still the question of, bodily autonomy and healthcare discrimination and, the death rate amongst, Black women in childbirth because they're not getting adequate care because of the color of their skin. There's so much that I can't even begin to understand of that experience. At the moment, that is the question that's the best that I can answer that question. And that is that I don't feel that I have the right to create that narrative, because it is ongoing and important, and it's a conversation that needs to happen, and that we as allies, as people who have benefited from the privilege of being white, have benefited from the privilege of not having to move through the world with that fear, and with that stigma, that we have to create an environment where that experience is first told and first exemplified and embodied by people who have lived that and whose experience that is.
Yeah, but you know that this is something that needs to change in everyone's hearts, you know? That's the crazy thing about it. I know that the issues in America and Canada are totally different than in Europe. But what I saw with the Ukraine war, which is kind of like two countries next to us, and it was, I know that it's a disaster and it's like so sad, but for some reason, I think it opened the hearts of a lot of people, because suddenly you saw older people or those who maybe like were more judging people from different parts of the world and treating them like something else. And suddenly they were like offering help and everything. And even though it may not last for the whole part or until today, there were so many changes. And I saw that even in my family, like suddenly we have a wonderful lady from Ukraine in our second apartment. And just that single thing, like, because it was actually funny because we were the very first family in our city. And one day I just got a call if we can do that because I applied to some farm and I was like, oh, yeah, definitely. And I was like kind of thinking how this little thing that I did in the moment affected like 10 people around, which is kind of incredible. Like the girl who came here to live here and to start a new life completely in a different country without anything suddenly made like several friends, start a new life, a new job at my dad's company. And, you know, like so many things around changed just because one little thing. And it was kind of beautiful to see that people were open to that because before they would be like, why someone should come here? We don't have enough ourselves and so on. So it kind of makes me think that the fear in everyone makes these kind of things that suddenly people are threatening people in a sad, very wrong way instead of like welcoming them purely with our heart.
Yeah, I think adversity breeds, recognition. I think that what you're doing is incredible. Truthfully, I think we do have a very long way to go. And I say this, and I have family near the border in Poland, and I know that everybody's really nervous. And the thing that is people are opening their homes as well, but there's also still a prejudice, and so one of the reasons why people are willing to open their homes is because the people that are coming in are their neighbors. They're white. They look like they do. They speak a similar language. When I hear a Ukrainian woman, saying Obama's coming, I understand what they're saying because the languages are similar, right? We've got the same root. But one of the things that was coming out, unfortunately, was the fact that, Syrian refugees were coming to the border and being turned away, and they were also going through war, but they didn't look the part,
That's another issue.
Yeah, people that are Muslim, and they're also coming from war-torn countries, and they still can't get in. They're still not getting the help. They're spending years in refugee camps.
Yeah. Well, I just want to say that you see some kind of shift happening, but it's still not the thing that we would love, right? To be in today's world. Like it's step by step, but so slow.
I think progress is happening. I think it's slow.
Yeah.
I think it's happening as it's slow, and I think that, it takes people like you to, to bring people in their homes and make that happen and make that change, to really bring that awareness into the world and to create an environment where we can have the dialogue and we can open those doors and we can, I think that's really important.
Speaking about that, there is actually a project called The Gathering, if you know about it. And basically, I think it was 10 women of color and 10 white people putting together a project where they spent a lot of time talking via Zoom and online and having exactly this kind of like dialogue about things and issues. And the result of that was that they created several wall art pieces, also from polymer clay. So that's just something that I love to mention because for those who are listening, this is a polymer clay project. And
what's the name of the project?
Would you like to write it down?
Yeah, I am writing it down. Yeah,
the Gathering.
The Gathering. Okay.
Yeah,
I'm terrible with names and with titles, and so I have to write stuff down. Otherwise, it just goes right through my brain. I'm gonna look that up.
Well, we chose a different topic after the Marvel.
I mean, it's real, right? It's stuff that's happening now, and I think everything that's going on around us influences it. And the question is very real, right? You asked me, whether about pieces being multicultural, and the answer of why they can't be that much, at least for me, is very complex and very, very difficult. And I think it's important to have that conversation.
I have a few questions about your art as well. So I would like to give you the space to talk about it Because, well, I'm curious that if you would put together your very first sculpture and the latest one, what has changed?
Oof. um, a lot and not very, very much. I think that my work is becoming more playful. Um, obviously I'm constantly learning and my skill is evolving and changing and details are coming in different ways. And I'm wrestling more and more again with like the idea of color and representation and skin and my part in that. And so especially as kind of the work is becoming it's growing and it's getting out into the world in a way that I never expected. My responsibility for how I'm making my work is something that is also coming into the forefront of how I think about it. And so yeah, I think my very first piece I think is one that's very dear to my heart. It actually lives in Germany right now. It's Granny Germain. And it was, I didn't think about that one. It just came out entirely on its own. It didn't come to me in the sense of like I had an idea in my mind and I was going to be able to create, this thing that I was seeing. It was very much like, okay, something is happening right now and I'm just going to follow it. And so I think that right now I do tend to think a little bit more about concept and how I want things to look and to be framed and the complexity of that is going up. So, the two most recent ones are the Olgas, which are actually right there. And this is one that I'm just finishing right now. It's still in the works, but.
Well, your artwork is full of incredible details, and I'm curious if you have a tip for patients.
Not in everyday life. It's the one, I think it's the one thing where I just become obsessively detail oriented. I can't explain it. I think that it's actually one of my favorite parts of the process. Is bringing in those details and those like tiny little scratches and like
getting
the
lost
wrinkles
in
and
that.
stretch marks and all of that. I think that's it's bringing it to life in a different way, and so it doesn't feel like patience. It doesn't feel like I'm working. The bit where it does feel like it's work and that requires patience is actually building the frames. And then like working around the frames, it's like the most tedious part of it because it's a blob. It doesn't kind of give you the feel of what it's going to be yet. But it's none of it feels like work other than that kind of part of it. So I kind of just dive in and everything goes away.
And right now in your life, if I'm correct, you have like sculpting and photography, and you are switching.
So right now I'm doing half and half. So half the time I'm doing, so 3 days a week I do photography and editing. So I do work for a company in Montreal doing editing for other photographers around the world. And doing my own photography and portraits and stuff like that. And then I would say that as well in those evenings and the other 4 days of the week I'm doing this. I don't get out much. I just work. Which is fine. COVID still is there. I'm staying in the bubble. So technically it probably is a full-time job, but on paper I do also work elsewhere, yes.
Yeah. Well, there was a question in the Polymer Week magazine where you had the interview, and I think we asked you if you would prefer or if you can choose between photography and sculpting, and you said that you cannot live without the sculpting, right?
I can't live without it, but I don't want to choose.
Yeah.
I mean, they're different sides of the same coin, right? Like they're different ways of exploring people and beauty and kind of things like that. I think with the photography, what's really interesting is that I get to meet other people on their level, and I get to explore experiences outside of my own. So I get to, I get to explore the other person and their life and their vision in the way that they come out into the world. And so that's actually, one of the ways that I do get to connect with the outside world in a very different way. Whereas this is kind of the internal world coming out.
Well, I think that a lot of people from your audience are asking if your sculptures show real people, or if it's more like your imagination, or maybe auto-portrait.
I think it's
I'm
mostly
sorry, maybe
imagination.
auto-portrait. I just realized how bad it sounds.
No, it doesn't.
You know what I mean? Like, you are more like creating elderly women, and you are definitely young. So I'm sorry.
As I sit here drinking my coffee and thinking about biscuits. Yeah, no, maybe I'm secretly an old lady at heart. I don't know. So I think it depends on how you see age. A lot of people see age as growing conservatism and, this kind of turning inwards and kind of locking yourself away from the world. And I see it very differently. I see it as evolution and growth and life, right? It's life experience. And so, if they are self-portraits, I'm not complaining because it means that, they've lived. But I think they take different aspects. So, there probably is a piece of somebody that I know in every one of them, right? Somebody that has affected or kind of changed my life and my experience. And, the way that I'm growing as a person and moving throughout the world is probably definitely coming out in these, whether it's an emotion or a gesture or like resistance or, there's obviously like anger and all sorts of things that, that do percolate and come out. And each of those things has a history, it's filtered through a lens of experience. So yes and no is the answer to that.
Have you ever got an offer to sculpt someone else as a model?
I do get requests for commissions regularly. I do turn them down. I think for the most part, it's not been things that I'm necessarily interested in doing, or that I feel that I would be able to. I don't want to say do well, but I would be able to kind of do properly. There was one that I was kind of intrigued by, which was I got asked to do the Queen, I think it was like the Queen of Persia at some point. So that was one that they didn't follow up. But oftentimes it's just kind of like people see that I do realism and then they want like, their family member or, they want an action figure for their kid or something like that. And it, art is something that is deeply personal and it takes a really long time to make.
Sure.
And so you invest a lot of time in it, right? Like one of these pieces will take a month to make from beginning to finish. And if I'm going to do that, it has to be something that I care deeply about.
How do you feel when you finish the sculpture?
Often very frustrated. It'll take me a minute to like come back to it and appreciate it. I tend to be. I'm the kind of person that's never fully satisfied with something until much later, and so sometimes it'll take me a month or two to be like, okay, this is okay. I can be with this. And so I'm learning to let things go. That's something that has been a really interesting process, to kind of just accept that it's good enough. It's not perfect. It's not exactly the way that I imagined, but it's enough and it's okay. And so it depends on the piece, I would say. Some of them I love better than others. There's some that are hiding in the cupboard right now that I just, there's a meme that was circulating of just like, don't do drugs, do art. It's much more expensive and you put your heart and soul into it and then end up with something that you absolutely hate. There's like an entire cupboard of stuff that is just never going to see the light of day.
Oh, yeah.
But there's other ones that I'm happy with. You know, like the two Olgas were probably the hardest piece that I've worked on. It was a real struggle to kind of get them to a place where they kind of matched up with the vision that I had, especially around like face and eyes and just kind of getting it's hard for me to work small. And I think that's probably why I do it, is because it's difficult, which is interesting. But and so, you know, getting the details of the face was something that was a real struggle. And so I kept coming back to it. And at some point I was like, okay, this works. It's enough. And then they kind of came into being and are their own, they're kind of their own thing, and I'm satisfied with them, if that makes sense.
But you are selling your artwork, right?
Yeah.
The process of sending that and just letting the sculpture to live its own life. Isn't it frustrating?
No. I think the only time that it's a little frustrating is because I work with a couple of galleries, so I show through that, and I'll also, I also sell to the person directly, depending on whether or not the gallery represents a piece or not. So sometimes they'll get first choice. But one of the things that I love is the follow up, like knowing who they're with, where they're kind of living their best life. So like I know that Germaine is in Germany. And I get updates, I'll get updates of just like, I'm having coffee with Germaine today. And then like, I'll get a picture of her, and it always makes me really happy. And then there's others where I have no idea. So like Bubble Gum was sold through a gallery, and I discovered that it's a young family, and it's somewhere out there, like it went from Toronto into the ether. I have no idea. It's just in Canada or where. And I wonder about it, right? Like I wonder about where they've ended up, because they, that person has, my brain child in their living room or whatever,
And how many sculptures are they somewhere in the world?
A couple now. So, I mean, keeping in mind it's only a year and a half. So there are two that are making their way back from a gallery in Germany. And in Munich. There's one that's actually living there, which is Germaine. There's 3, I think, around kind of Toronto and that region. One is literally being packed to go now, which is the Dino Granny. So they're out there. They're kind of making their way out into the world. And then these two, off this one. This one and the two Olgas are going to be going to the gallery in Toronto, and then I think this one will be going to Munich for an exhibition in September with the Storpunch Gallery. I don't know if I'm saying that right. My German sucks.
Well, I don't know, but I will check that out because like it's super close. So I shall take a picture for you.
Oh my god, yes, please.
So it would be nice. Yeah.
Yeah, that would be
amazing.
And
I'm always like happy about to see like polymer clay artwork in the museum. Like we talk about it with Joseph Barbacha, and it's like fascinating because he was like, sometimes he doesn't write that it's made from polymer clay, but he just writes clay. Yeah. And like there always has been some kind of definition of the material as something what it's more for the kids or something more like a craft material than for art itself. But in your case, what you do and the sculptures and the way they look like, I believe that it's not a problem that you create from polymer clay for those museums, right?
I think that I didn't know about that when I started, and so it didn't cross my mind. I also have very strong opinions on people that make clear distinctions between craft and art, especially that craft was something that is traditionally associated with women's work and therefore wasn't considered worthy of being exhibited and wasn't considered, high art until very recently, and that's changing again. And so, yeah, the craft side is interesting because it's, who gets to decide? And so, I didn't really have that mindset when I was coming into it. I also didn't think about the fact that I was creating art. in that way because I was just, I was just thinking about the thing that was in front of me. Um, and, how it kind of lent itself to something. I was very removed from, the politics of it. Because, art is very political. And yeah, so if somebody wants to consider craft, by all means, because craftsmanship is exactly that, it's people that have lent hundreds of thousands of hours into their skill and into their talent and into their work. And I would argue that, that is what makes an artist is those hours of practice and hours of work and the creative process that goes into it. And so I think there should be a shift away from that word, just generally.
How do you feel being an artist in your country?
It's been harder to break into the art world here than it was in Europe. And I think that's twofold. I think one is I live in a French province as, a first generation Anglophone. I do speak French, but it's not what comes the most easily to me. And so I can't get into a Montreal gallery at the moment. It's been really difficult. And I think part of that is, that it's a very exclusive, we are a small country. We're large in land and small in people, and so the competition is very high. The artist caliber is very, very high and everywhere, and so it's the gallery amount per people is probably smaller than it is in Europe. But I've had a lot of success in Toronto in the States and in Europe. Most of my pieces, when they do sell, go to France, Germany, UK, Belgium, US, and Ontario. Like those have been kind of the main points of attention that I've got. For some reason, I'm also really big in Iran, which is great. So like a quarter of the people that follow me are Iranian. And so it's been an interesting thing to see kind of where things land. I've also found a big difference since I shifted to using my middle name as opposed to my last name, because my last name was very, very long. So like my last name was Niemczynovska, and for most English speakers, they kind of just go, yes. They just can't. And so there was a shift, and I think also like an embodiment in that, because I was able to kind of give that a name that it has on its own. And once I was able to do that and kind of find a home for the way that I can make my work, that, where it's cohesive and it kind of is coming together as like a body of work, not just as individual pieces here and there. That's been changing a lot. But I think it's a bit like anywhere. I think being an artist is hard. I think that, you dedicate a lot of time and a lot of money and a lot of effort into something that's not necessarily going to go anywhere. When I started making these, I didn't think about the fact that they might get into a gallery or that they might get out somewhere. It came as a complete surprise. And so that was something that has been really interesting. I mean, it's always been something that I kind of dreamt about and would have loved to happen. And so to see that kind of realize itself is incredible. I never thought I'd be doing it for the naked old ladies. But I guess that's kind of my truest voice, though, that's coming through. So it's I think just as hard and just as easy as it is everywhere else for a variety of reasons. I think one of the things that kind of came out a lot, especially in Quebec, is like I'd present my work and they'd kind of see my name and be like, "Oh, where are you from?" And I'd be like, "I'm from Montreal." And they're like, "No, where are you really from?" And kind of have to explain it. It's like, "Oh, well, you're not really a Canadian artist, so like you don't really fit into this world." And seeing that change has been very interesting as well.
Wow. Well, let me ask, is working and sculpting from polymer clay something that you would love to do for the rest of your life?
Happily. If you told me that this is like, as of tomorrow, I could just like, live in a sea of clay and like just to do this nonstop, I'd be over the moon. Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah, I think it's something I'll
wonderful.
keep doing. My next thing is trying to explore scale with these and seeing if I can build them up and how the material holds up to a little bit more stress.
Well, I can't wait to see your new upcoming artworks. It's just wonderful message and story of yours. Thank you so much for being a part of today's podcast. I really appreciate that.
Thank you for having me. I really
Thank you.
appreciate it.
Shout outs to every Marvel fan.
Oh my God. Yes.
Yeah, thank you so much. Have a beautiful day.